Annyeonghaseyo, this is meowmurai. Let's continue our game of Despera Drops running on Nintendo Switch 2.
世界を革命してみせましょ
う。来るの遅いよ。早く早く。
これでいいかな。
さっぱり見当もつかないね。少なくとも俺は爆弾で吹っ飛ばされるような恨みを買った覚えはない。
私もだ。
僕もだよ。
ええ、僕もですね。
サリーもだよ。
じゃあお前か？
そんな覚えありません。
I wasn't that kind of person, and there was no way I could come up with a reason someone was out for my life, other than being a witness to murder.
しかしこうなってくると、いつ何を警戒すればいいかわからなくなってくるな。
ええ、少なくとも報道を見る限り、警察は信用できないと考えていいとは思いますが。
警察の方が圧力をかけられる側かもしれないしな。捕まったら今度こそ終わりだろうな。ますますきな臭くなってきたじゃないか。
Frank sat on the sofa and crossed his legs. With a sigh, he poured scotch into a glass and chugged it down all at once.
あれ？フラン君出ていくんじゃなかったの？
気が変わった。
うわ、勝手ー。さっきまであんなに文句言ってたのに。
あんな報道があったんだ。深夜にほっつき歩いてりゃ警戒されるだろう。それに警察の連中が利用されてるとなると先が読めない。こういう時は下手に動かないに限るよ。信用ならない犯罪者と一緒だろうとな。
それについては同感だ。少なくとも今夜はこの家でおとなしく過ごした方がいいだろ
ふわ。じゃあもう寝ようぜ。結構いい時間だし、眠くない？
確かに寝不足はパフォーマンス低下を招きますし、そろそろ寝ましょうか。寝室はどこでしょ
寝室は2階だよ。あと1階にゲストルーム。
う？おや？よく知ってますね。
家入ったら構造を確認するのは常識だろ？あとは書斎とか物置もあったけどね。寝室にはクイーンサイズのベッドが1つだけ。ゲストルームの方はシーツとかないから使えないかな。何にせよ、全員で仲良く寝るのは無理だね。
ならその寝室を俺が使わせてもらう。
いやいや、そこは僕が。
They broke into a run, racing for the bedroom, but Gib blocked them before they could get anywhere.
全員止まれ。今晩はこのリビングで集まって眠るんだ。
え？リビング？
はあ、またリーダー気取りかよ。つうかなんでまたこんな場所で寝ようって言うんだ？
何かがあった時に迅速に動くためだ。全員集まっていた方が不測の事態に対処できるだろう。
はあ、まあそうですが、集まってって。
レディーがこんなところで男たちと一緒に寝るなんてありえない。っていうか、そんなんじゃゆっくり寝れないし、お姉ちゃんだって嫌だよね。まあ。
Just like Sally, I wanted to avoid staying in the same room as a group of adult men, not to mention criminals.
サリーとお姉ちゃんは絶対寝室で寝るから、お姉ちゃん行こ
おい、勝手な行動は。
おーっと待った。こんな一日になったおかげで全員疲れ切ってるんだ。寝室を誰が使うか、ここは公平に決めようじゃないか。
う。フラン君紳士じゃない。こういう時はレディーファーストってやつじゃないの？
今の時代は男女平等がスタンダードだろう。なあ、カミュ、ラミー。
僕は2人と一緒でもいいけど。ただし、他のでかい奴らはリビングね。
ラミー君も背高いじゃん。一緒じゃベッド狭そうだし、サリーは嫌。
僕もベッド以外では寝つけないんですよね。できれば枕の高さも普段使っているものと同じ方が。
アッシュ君何勝手に抜け駆けしようとしてるの？ダメだってば。寝室はサリーたちが使うの。
なら早く言い合いを終えてくれ。おいおい、全員身勝手だな。
フランクも含めてね。
わかった。寝室は女性2人に使ってもらうとしよう。だが、男は全員リビングで眠るぞ。
は？何勝手に決めてるんだよ。こんなガキどもに気を使う理由なんてないだろ
気を使うわけではない。あくまで交換条件でだ。
Gib then took out our phones, which had been confiscated.
こいつが使えないのは全員困るだろう。だから、ハッカーの彼女に追跡機能などをハッキングで解除してもらうんだ。
サリーが？
ああ、できるだろ
まあ、できなくはないけど。
う。そうだ。どうだみんな。彼女がこれの追跡機能を解除する。その代わりに寝室を得る。
まあ。
妥当だな。不満っちゃ不満だが、これ以上言い合ってても仕方ないしな。
決まりだ。解除を頼んだ。
Gib handed over the bag with everyone's smart devices. Seeing all of them, Sally puffed out her cheeks.
デバイスのセキュリティ解除の依頼は5000ユーロからなんだけどな。結構面倒なんだよね、これ。
言っとくが、おもちゃにして壊すんじゃねえぞ、ガキ。
サリーをなんだと思ってるの？もう、そんなこと言ってると、フラン君のスマホだけ改造してやんないよ。
改造？ハッカーに自分のデバイスを預けるというのもなかなかに怖いものがありますね。
だが一時的にでも使えるようにしておかないと不便だろう。それにどうせみんな正規ルートで手に入れたものではあるまい。
ま、確かにそうだけどね。
ではできたら下に持ってきてくれ。くれぐれも勝手なことはするな。
はいはい。お姉ちゃん行こう。
Sally led me by the hand, and together we headed to the stairs. Just before we finished climbing them, I turned around and looked at the living room. The others were already lounging in their own places and ways. But their eyes never stopped scanning the room, wary of the possibility that police might charge in at any moment. Would I be able to leave this place safely? A sliver of apprehension wormed into my heart as I stepped onto the second floor. July 16th, 2028, 2324, hideout bedroom.
疲れた。
Sally sprawled onto the bed as soon as we'd entered the bedroom. It hit me. I'd finally put some distance between myself and those men. The moment I shut the door and realized I was alone with another girl, I felt strength rush out of my body. Feeling weak, I sat on the bed. That was so scary. These were probably my true feelings. Though I'd hid it, I'd been terrified the entire time. I'd witnessed someone's murder. I'd been shoved into a prisoner transport vehicle. The van had even gone up in flames, and the drivers died. I'd ended up as a fugitive of justice, and finally I'd been in the same room as unfamiliar men who were also criminals. Too many things happening at once, numbing my perception, but clearly these were all unthinkable events that didn't belong in my routine life. Or at least they should be unthinkable. But now...
ねえねえ、横浜に住んでるって言ってたけど、普段お洋服どこで買ってるの？原宿行く？
For some reason, Sally looked cheerful and excited, as if she'd only come on a carefree holiday trip. She didn't display a semblance of fear. How can she relax in these circumstances?
いいなあ、日本。やっぱサリーは直接見たいんだよね。前はパリにも店舗あったのになくなっちゃったし。ってお姉ちゃん聞いてる？
ごめん、何の話だっけ？
もうお姉ちゃん反応悪い。せっかく日本の可愛いファッションについてお話できると思ったのに。
ごめんね、いろいろあったから疲れちゃって。
まあしょうがないか。むさ苦しい男たちに囲まれてたもんね。
That's not what exhausted me, though.
ああ、 サリーも疲れたし眠いんだけどな。スマホの改造やらなきゃいけないんだよね。あ、でもサリーの PC が無事か気になるし、まずは何か仕掛けられてないかチェックしないと。
Sally turned on her laptop and began typing something with great vigor. Her expression and aura changed instantly. Not wanting to disturb her, I moved on to one corner of the room. That was when I noticed the door. What's this? I opened it to find another bathroom.
この部屋バスルームついてるんだ。
Hearing my mumbling, Sally whipped her face up. Her eyes were shining with joy.
ほんと？じゃあお姉ちゃん先入ってなよ。
いや、私は。
サリーはまだやることあるし、日本人はお風呂入ると疲れが取れるんでしょ？
I couldn't really deny that when I saw the bathroom. I had the urge to take a shower. But at the same time, was it really okay for me to be so relaxed during times of uncertainty? That said, in my situation, I didn't know when I'd have access to a shower again. Above all, I really wanted to wash off my sweat.
じゃあお言葉に甘えてシャワー先に借りていいかな。
オッケー。じゃあその間にサリーはみんなのスマホいじっておくね。って顔色悪いけど大丈夫？一緒に入ろっか？
一人で大丈夫だよ。ありがとう。
I turned down Sally's proposal and walked into the bathroom. After my shower, my anxiety eased somewhat. I walked into the changing area, wiped down my body, and picked up my clothes. That was when I noticed the hem of my dress had been mended meticulously. The torn hem had been a pitiful sight. It was nothing but dangling threads after Ash's rough handling, but now it had a cute polka dotted frills.
サリーちゃん、これって。
I put on my dress and returned to the bedroom. There, Sally was sprawled on the bed, working on the phones that were connected to her laptop.
これをこうしてと。シャワー出たんだ。よかった。結構長く入ってるから倒れてるかと思ったよ。
ごめんね。次どうぞ。それよりこのワンピースってもしかしてサリーちゃんが直してくれたの？
気づいた？可愛いでしょ。隣の物置にソーイングセットがあったからアレンジしたんだ。アッシュくんたらズタズタにしちゃうんだもん。あのままじゃ可愛くないでしょ。でも生地が足りないからお姉ちゃんの胸元のリボン使っちゃった。ごめんね。
I just noticed. The polka dot pattern seemed familiar, and now I knew why. It was the decorative ribbon. I rarely ever wore dresses with such a short length, so I felt awkward, but it offered a lot of mobility. Best of all, it was adorable.
かわいい。ありがとう、サリーちゃん。
どういたしまして。おしゃれは女の子の命だからね。それよりサリーちゃんじゃなくてサリーでいいよ。サリーも妹みたいでその方が嬉しいから。
わかった。ありがとう、サリー。
じゃあせっかくだし連絡先交換しよう。このスマホはもう改造してあるんだ。
改造。
そう、警察に探知されないようにプログラム改造しておいたの。だからもう使っても大丈夫だよ。
She fiddled with my phone and added herself as a contact before holding it out to me with a radiant smile.
はい、かわいい日本のファッション思いついたら教えてね。
I took my phone from her. Her name was already favorited on my contacts list. But a hacked phone, huh? It was a whole other level compared to the SIM card unlocking my friends in uni did. All I could think was that this probably voided my warranty. But more importantly, I had my phone back. With Sally's help, I could use it safely, so I wanted to text Ida and tell her that I was safe at least. When I tapped on her name in my messages, the strange text about dinner was still in the log. She hadn't sent any worried or concerned text afterward. In fact, I had sent her a couple. 2 texts had been sent from my phone telling Ida that I'd be going home to Japan, but she shouldn't worry. Naturally, I hadn't contacted Ida myself. Who in the world had typed these texts?
ああ、分かってると思うけど SNS は監視されてるだろうから写真とかアップしないようにね。どこにいるかバレちゃうから。
分かってるよ。
I snapped out of my daze at Sally's voice. Then I locked my phone and placed it screen down on the bed. When I looked at my hands, my eyes were drawn to the cuffs that I hadn't managed to get rid of. Handcuffs with digital locks that police didn't normally use. A time bomb on the van. Mysterious texts in my phone history. Something big was brewing beneath the surface. Something I was powerless against. I could tell, but I couldn't do anything. My fears only grew. A while later, Sally finished unlocking everyone's phones. We finally retired for the night. The two of us lay side by side on the large bed. I was exhausted, but sleep didn't come to me at all. I didn't know when the police would come marching in. I didn't know whether it would be even police. Just the sound of the tree leaves swaying in the wind and brushing the window bothered me, and I turned over. Sally must be just as anxious as me. That was what I assumed, but she turned out to be sleeping like a log. Maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, since she was a hacker. Though we were both girls in the same situation, I couldn't compare to her nerves of steel. The fact that I couldn't share my apprehensions with anyone was a depressing realization. It was even worse because all the men downstairs were scary. Frank seems like he's always on the edge. Gibb is large and intimidating. And above all else, he said he illegally possessed firearms. Camus seems like a normal person, but he destroyed his house. Ram is a good guy, but he's a thief. I don't even know what Ash is thinking. Honestly, I wanted to run away from here right now, but what if those agents in black caught me? Next time, they could kill me for real. Though I wanted to ask the police for help, I no longer knew who I should trust and who I shouldn't. Unease plagued my mind, and I nearly reached out to Sally until I realized that I wasn't wearing gloves, the gloves that had always guarded my heart. That my guardians were missing fanned my fears even more. I was anxious. What if I saw something I didn't want to see again? I climbed out of bed, careful not to wake Sally, and looked through the corset for anything that could serve at the same purpose. A while later, I found a pair of white gloves. They were pretty similar to the ones I'd used. I'm sorry, I'll borrow these for a while. Apologizing to their owner in my mind, I slipped them on. The familiar feel of gloves against my skin brought some relief, even with the guilt mixed in. I felt bad for the original owner, but I swore to myself when I found similar ones I'd buy them and deliver them to this house alongside an apology. Thanks to my newfound relief, fatigue came crashing down on me again. My head felt heavy, and my body was screaming for sleep. But however I tried, the sound of the wind and the distant howls of dogs woke me up again. In the end, I barely managed to rest. July 17th, 2028, Monday, 5:57 in the morning. Hideout bedroom. The next morning, after a night of only short snippets of sleep, I found myself wide awake in the early morning. As I stared at the unfamiliar ceiling in a daze, I let out a small sigh. If only everything that happened yesterday was a dream. My naive hopes were easily crushed with a glance to my side. Sally was sleeping there. She was very bold, sleeping like a log despite the situation. I couldn't help but marvel at her. She was the polar opposite to me, who'd barely slept because I'd been so worried. I turned around and tried to get a little bit more sleep, but my body simply refused to comply. With resignation, I got out of bed and fervently checked on the scenery outside. No signs of police or other people in the vicinity. It seemed that we'd thrown off their trail for now, but we still weren't too far from that highway. It was only a matter of time. In fact, the owners of the villa might return at any time. Knowing that we couldn't stay for long, I felt restless. I needed to think urgently about my future. But what should I do from now on? Sticking together with the men, the criminals, downstairs didn't seem like the right decision. Plus, they were likely the ones who would abandon me in a flash, not the other way around, since I was clearly dead weight. In that case, I had to work out a plan for myself. What's Sally going to do, I wonder? I glanced at the only other girl in the group. Suddenly, I had a sense of something was a bit unusual about what I was seeing. Wait. Trying to pinpoint it, I stared at her and realized that she was surprisingly muscular. I was reminded of how easily she'd cut her chains last night. Even when we ran as a group, she hadn't been out of breath like me. I'd assumed that she was a hermit as a hacker, but maybe she worked out regularly. She had more stamina than me, so she likely wouldn't hesitate to make the right decision in emergencies. Our circumstances were like night and day. That realization brought another wave of helplessness down on me. And that was when Sally's stomach chose to growl in protest as she slept. Looking unhappy, she turned in her sleep. By the sound of it, she could wake up very soon. If she's hungry, maybe I should whip up something for breakfast. Last night, she'd mentioned my dress. I wanted to thank her, and above all else, I felt like my mind would be going in circles if I stayed still here. I wanted to distract myself from the pit of worry by doing something, and making breakfast would work. Plus, I was hungry too. On an empty stomach, no matter what I chose, to run or turn myself in, I wouldn't be able to make the right decision when it mattered. Gib had taught me that. With my mind made up, I did my morning routine and headed downstairs. But the problem was, as I figured, they're all here. Nervously, I peered into the first floor from the top of the stairs, and sure enough, the men were in the living room. Frank had monopolized the three-seater sofa as his bed. Ram was tucked nimbly into a cushioned chair. Meanwhile, Ash leaned against the chair, while Camus sat in a corner with his back against the wall. Gib had plopped down before the front door and was sleeping like that, almost like a gatekeeper, making sure that none of us got out. Seeing the five men made my courage wither away. Though they were sleeping, I was still scared to get anywhere near them. I considered waiting for Sally to wake up, but I knew this shouldn't be a big deal. I only had to sneak to the kitchen without waking them. I tiptoed across the living room and made it to the kitchen. Then I sat down in front of the sink so that I was out of sight before breathing a sigh of relief. I opened the fridge to see what I could make, but hesitated. My conscience asked me, "Are you really going to steal food again?"
そうやって流されているだけの人生は楽か?
Ash's word from last night echoed in my mind. No, don't hesitate. I swore that I would take responsibility for my own life and my own actions. I fetched a bottle of mineral water and chugged it down as much as I could in one gulp. The cool water helped quell my restlessness somewhat. Once again, I looked through the ingredients in the fridge and thought about what recipes I could make. I only had to note down all the ingredients I used. Once I safely returned to my normal life, I would compensate them. That was the least I could do. I took out one ingredient after another and set them on the counter. Soon, I dived right into cooking. While I was cooking by myself, Ram walked into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. He opened the fridge, drank some water, then looked at my busy hands. His eyes widened and lit up.
うまそう。ねえねえ、何これ?
The tension in my shoulders eased a tad at his smile. Thanking my lucky stars that Ram was the first awake, I responded with a smile of my own.
冷凍の野菜とベーコンがあったから、パンに合わせてスープと炒め物を作ったの。みんなの分もあるから、よかったらラミー君もどうぞ。
ほんと？ってうわ、クロワッサンあるじゃん。これどうしたの？
冷凍のクロワッサンをオーブンで焼いただけだけど。
マジ？へえ、オーブンで焼くとこんな感じなんだ。昨日のパンはまあそこそこって思ったけど、これはマジで焼きたてじゃん。なあなあみんな、ミカが料理作ってくれてる。しかもすげえ美味しそうなの。
With Ram's call, everyone sleeping in the living room woke up one after another and came to the kitchen.
肩が凝りました。
They filed in, looking exhausted. When Gib came in, he looked at me and the frying pan in my hands before putting on a bewildered expression.
なぜ料理なんかをしているんだ?
他にできることもありませんし、もちろん皆さんの分もありますので、よかったら食べてください。
全員分を作った。
いやー、これは予想外の展開ですね。
まさか逃亡中に手作りの温かい食事にありつけるとはな。
For some reason, everyone looked at me with surprise. They must not have expected anyone in the group to be willing or able to cook. These were people who didn't bat an eyelid at stealing ingredients, but they were shocked by cooking. I felt rather peculiar watching them.
料理ね。他人の家のものを勝手に食べるのはダメだったんじゃないのか?
I'll compensate them later.
後で弁償しますから。 無事に問題を解決できた際にはきちんとこちらの住所に代金をお送りするつもりです。
I shot Frank a glare of my own as I responded to his scathing words. He looked dumbfounded.
おいおい、マジで言ってんのか？
さすがにそこまでやる必要ないんじゃない？こんな立派な別邸持ってるような金持ちだし、7人分の食料が減ったぐらい気にしないって。
でも私がそうしたいんです。
本当にバカ正直なやつだな。ま、てめえの金なんだから好きにすりゃいいさ。
はい、そうします。
Hearing my declaration, Frank shrugged his shoulders with resignation.
何はともあれ、逃亡生活の初日から手作りの朝食が食べられるとは幸運というものですね。しかも日本の女性のもしかして作ってくれたのは日本の朝ごはんというやつですか？寿司、うなぎ、一度は食べてみたいと思っていたのです。
いえ、冷凍庫にあった食材で作っただけなので、特に日本の料理というわけではないです。
そりゃよかった。日本食じゃ食えないところだった。
Does he dislike Japanese food? The reputation of natto in the West was infamous. Even in Uni, many people shied away from Japanese cuisine. People like Kamu were rather rare.
なあなあ、もう食べていい？
今よそうね。
After doing a quick taste test of the dishes, I laid out food enough for everyone on the table. Suddenly, I realized that Sally hadn't come down yet.
サリーを起こしてきます。皆さんは先にどうぞ召し上がってください。
After encouraging them to dig in, I made my way to the stairs. For some reason, Ram looked at me with a melancholic smile.
なんだか、ミカってママみたいだな。
Mom? He looked like he was my age, so I thought he could be teasing me, but I hadn't sensed anything like that in his tone. His eyes were filled with something like longing as he gazed at me. The expression on his face was striking, and I wasn't able to find a reply. July 17th, 2028, 6:46. Oh, they spent quite a while. Hideout, living room. I went to the second floor and ended up having to wake Sally pretty much forcefully before I headed back downstairs. The TV was on and everyone was tucking into their food as they watched the morning news.
まだ眠い。
ほらサリー、朝ごはん冷めちゃうから。
She was still half asleep. I placed a fork in her hand before sitting down to my own breakfast.
あれ、お姉ちゃん、その手どうしたの？
Limply holding the fork, Sally stared at my hands, mystified.
ってこのグローブのこと？
うん、そんなのつけてたっけ？
実はいつも日焼け対策でつけてたの。私肌が弱いから。
I gave her the same excuse that I was given Ida. Telling her the truth was simply out of the question.
なんだ、僕はてっきり指紋を残さないためかと思って、ちょっと感心してたのにな。
Ram said that with a big smile. Fingerprints are the things he thinks about? I never even thought of such a concept until he mentioned it. Once again, it hit me that they were criminals. Thinking that, I turned to gaze at the TV. On the screen was the same newscaster as last night, Rebecca Rosso. She was doing a follow-up report on the accident.
一晩明けての事故現場の様相です。依然として立ち入りは禁止されており、警察からの情報の開示もありません。この件について警察は固く口を閉ざしており、そのことがかえって疑念を深めております。なお、こちらが独自に入手した情報によると、
なんだ、一晩経ってもめぼしい情報はなさそうじゃないか。
やはり観光令が敷かれているようだな。こちらとしては幸いなことだが。
ええ、そうですね。状況が明かされていないうちになるべく遠くまで逃げた方が良さそうですね。
意外とここに潜伏してる方がいいんじゃね？
ここの住人が来ない保証があればな。
Though there was a mountain of things to worry about, at least there weren't reports about us. I breathed a sigh of relief, but instantly everything changed.
ただいま情報が入りました。事故に遭ったのは囚人護送車であり、7名の犯罪者が現在逃亡中とのことです。
Uh-oh.
なんだと。
The news said that it was an announcement from the police. I stared at the TV, stunned. Our portrait photos were lined up on the screen.
現在逃亡中の犯人についての詳細はこちらの通りです。天峰美香、日本国籍、殺人罪。ジブリエル・バルツァー、ドイツ国籍、殺人罪。アッシュマイヤー、スイス国籍、傷害罪。ラミー・カリエール、フランス国籍、窃盗罪。カミュアイン・ハルト、オーストリア国籍、危険物所持。サリー・デル・テスタ、イタリア国籍、サイバー犯罪。ハミエル・ルイス、スペイン国籍、詐欺罪。以上7名が逃走中とのことです。事故に遭った護送車に乗っていた7名は、共謀し、護送車の運転手と護衛官を殺害して逃亡したとみられます。犯罪歴からも非常に危険な逃亡者だとし、警察は7名をヨーロッパ全域に指名手配しました。目撃情報については今のところなく、
そんな。
My face had been shown on TV as a murderer. As if that wasn't enough, I was on an international wanted list. I looked at everyone, and even they couldn't only react with unified astonishment.
今のひどくない？サリーの顔、映り最悪だったんだけど。
いえ、問題はそこではないと思いますが。
つーかフランク、名前違うじゃん。
そうだよ。フラン君じゃなくてハミー君じゃない。もうせっかく名前覚えてあげたのに最悪だよ。
あの状況で本名を名乗るお前たちの方が俺には理解できないがね。それに嘘をついていたのは俺だけじゃないだろ。
Frank, no, Hamiel looked at Gib with derision.
ジブリエル・バルツァー。立派な名前じゃないか。それに殺人罪だって銃の不法所持って設定はどこ行ったんだよ。
善良な一般市民だと嘘をついていた詐欺師と大して変わらんだろう。
ジブリエル・バルツァー。どこかで聞いたことある名前だな。
そりゃ聞いたことある名前だろう。汚職と現職警官による警官殺害事件の犯人として一時期ヨーロッパ中を騒がせた有名人だからな。
Wait, he murdered a police officer?
警察ということはこれはおとり捜査、つまり私服警官というやつなんですか？
いや、おとり捜査で指名手配はされないだろう。それにもしそうだとしたらとっくに俺らは護送車に逆戻りしている。
ああ、そうですね。
つまりここにいる警官の旦那は正真正銘の指名手配犯。
There wasn't so much as a ripple in Gibbs' expression. He pressed his lips tightly together and stared.
おっと失礼。警官じゃなくて今じゃ元警官だったか。
どちらでもいい。
しかし7人の中に殺人者が2人ですか。なかなかすごい面々になってきましたね。
私は冤罪です。
はい、そうでした。申し訳ありません。
まさか旦那も無実だと主張するんじゃないだろうな。
殺人を犯した事実はある。別に。
In a calm, subdued voice, Gib affirmed his charges. He had denied that he was a murderer. Goosebumps rose on my skin. His looks were somewhat intimidating, but he'd also seemed like the one with the most common sense among us, until now at least. And he wasn't just a murderer. He was a former man of the law turned killer.
旦那が殺人犯だろうともうどうでもいいさ。俺らはまとめて仲良く運転手と護衛官殺害の罪を上乗せさせられたんだ。めでたくこれで全員殺人犯として指名手配だとよ。よかったな、お揃いになって。
全然良くないよ。は
あ、そのサービスはいらないんだけど。てかむしろ僕たち被害者じゃないの？
ええ、一歩間違えたら僕たちの方こそ丸焦げでしたからね。
昨夜の時点では死傷者なしという報道のはずだったが、 明らかに何者かによって情報が操作されているな。
情報操作。つまり何者かが僕たちを犯罪者に仕立てようとしていると。
その可能性は大きくなってきたな。
But they were all already criminals to begin with. I didn't have it in me to say it, though. I was well aware of the anguish that came from shouldering undeserving blame.
少なくとも誰かが私たちをはめようとしているのは確かだろう。その目的はわからないが。
めんどくせえ。
The mood sank and grew heavy, or so I'd assumed, until I saw Rom and Sally fighting over the last of breakfast.
ちょっと最後の1個取らないでよ。それサリーのなんだから。
こういうのは早いもん勝ちってね。だいたい大皿にあるものは誰のもんでもないだろ。名前書いてなかったし。
でもサリーが食べようと思ってたの。
やれやれ、緊張感のない奴らだな。
指名手配される大変さを知らないのだろ
う。旦那が言うと説得力がありすぎて泣けるね。ま、こうなった以上、現場近くからは早く逃げるが吉だな。俺はもう行くぜ。
Hamiel was the first to stand. Second was Ash. And then, this time, Gib didn't make any moves to detain them. All 7 of us ended up on the wanted list together. Moving as a group increased our chances of being seen. Even I knew that it was common sense to scatter. However, that common sense only applied to common situations, and this was anything but. After all, we were up against people who chained us together and tried to blow us up. When they realized they'd failed, they even put us on a wanted list. Wait, chained us together? As I thought back, the question seemed almost too obvious. Why had we been on the same van? We all had different nationalities and different charges.
待ってください。
Sensing that something wasn't right, I spoke up. Hamiel spun around and raised an eyebrow flippantly.
なんだ、警察が好きなんじゃなかったか？今になって置いてかぼりが嫌になったか？
いえ、そうじゃないんです。ただ一つ気になることがあって。
気になること？一体なんだ？
私たちが一緒の護送車で運ばれていた理由です。
そりゃ。
We committed crimes, seems like what Hamiel was going to say, but he broke off and held his tongue.
別に7人一緒に運ぶ必要なんてなかったはずです。手錠でつなぐ理由も。それこそ報道の情報を操作してまで捉えたい人がいたのだとしたら、その人だけ指名手配すればよかったはずです。
でも実際はそうしなかったと。
そもそも仮に刑務所に護送するにしても、男女を一緒にというのも確かに不自然といえば不自然ですね。
はい。その上私たちは通常の法的な手続きから外れて不当に拘束されて運ばれていました。逮捕そのものが私たちを集めるためのものだとしたら。
つまりこの7人が揃っていることに何かしらの意味があるというわけか。
はい。
We didn't know who was pulling the strings. The only lead we had at the moment was that they'd chosen to lump us together. Following that train of thought, if we could figure out the reason, we might be able to find clues about the identity of whoever or whatever was after us.
どうして私たちがこんな目に遭わなければならないのかわからなければ対処のしようがありません。ですから。
だから全員仲良しこよしで逃げるってか？おいおい、マジで言ってんのか？昨晩警察に保護を求めてたやつのセリフとは思えないな。つまり大使館に逃げ込んで無罪を主張するのは諦めたってわけだ。
警察や行政が今の私の言葉を信じるはずないとようやく理解できただけです。
I wanted to prove my innocence. Even now, that was my wish. Yet it was clear that it was next to impossible right now. Someone had fabricated the news, my charges, and put me on the European wanted list. If I went to an embassy or anywhere similar, I'd be arrested on the spot. I'd be done for. I wouldn't even have a chance to make my voice heard. Whoever wanted to capture me had easily made the media their puppets. They had power, influence. To make my claims of innocence heard, I'd need to figure out the goals of those who'd framed me.
俺は逆の意見だ。この7人が恣意的に集められたとなると、 なおさらあんたらと一緒にいられる気分じゃなくなってきたな。アバよ、元気でな。
君一人でなんとかなるのか？
Hamiel waved his hand and headed to the entrance, but Gibb's frosty voice rained down on his back, and he paused to look over his shoulder.
自分の身ぐらい自分で守れなくてどうする？少なくともこれまではそうやって生きてきたぜ。
でも結局逮捕されてしまったんですよね。
確かにそうだよな。あの護送車にいたんだし。
あの時は油断してたんだ。同じヘマはもう踏まないぜ。
でも元から逮捕されないよう常に警戒して行動していたんじゃないんですか？
Sally and Ram mentioned that they hadn't left any evidence behind, and Hamiel had been so thorough that he'd introduced himself with a fake name.
そりゃ、まあ。
なら、ハミエルはまた捕まるかもな。この大怪盗ラミー様でさえ、証拠がないってのに逮捕されたんだから。
確かにそうだな。私も十分に警戒はしていたつもりだ。それなのに捕らえられた。実際に警察以外の何者かが我々を捕らえようとしているのなら、君が一人になったところで、そいつらは君を狙う。確かにそうだな。私も十分に警戒はしていたつもりだ。それなのに捕らえられた。二度ないとは言えないだろう。実際に警察以外の何者かが我々を捕らえようとしているのなら、君が一人になったところで、そいつらは君を狙うことを諦めないはずだ。その時、一人でどうにか対処できる自信はあるのか？お前さんの得意な口先でどうこうできる相手だとは到底思えないがな。
言いたいことはわかるが、面倒なことには関わらないのが俺の心情なんだ。あんたみたいなむさ苦しい親父やガキどもと一緒にいられるか？第一、7人でいたら目立ってしょうがないだろうが。
あ、じゃあ家族のふりするとか。
こんなに顔も国籍も違う家族がいるか？
でもまあ僕は悪くないと思うけど、普通に考えて7人で指名手配されてんのに7人でいるとは警察も思わないだろうし。
なるほど。真理の裏をかくという発想ですね。
どうだ。何が起きるか予測できない状況で、あえて別に行動するのはかえって危険だと私は思うが。
私も同意見です。バラバラに行動すれば逃げ切れる。もしそうだというなら止めはしません。でもどこへ逃げるつもりですか？誰が狙っているのかわからない今、どこまで逃げればいいのかすら判明していません。
まあ、それはそうだが。
あ、ならば日本に逃げましょう。日本、ジャパン。
いいじゃん、サリーも日本行く。
入国審査の厳しい国は論外だ。
てか空港に入ったら一発で捕まるんじゃね？
あ、
こんなお気楽な連中と団体行動だ。自滅が早まるだけじゃないのか？
だが警察もこの犯罪者7人を一度に相手するのは骨が折れるだろうな。つまり
殺人犯に詐欺師にハッカー、爆弾魔に大怪盗だもんね。確かに全員揃ってる方ができることは多そうじゃん。
ラミー君がいれば昨日みたいにドア開けてもらえるもんね。
スマホの解除もな。
The pair who'd been squabbling over side dishes only minutes before were now sharing compliments.
どうだ。ここは協力した方が成功率が上がると思うが。
ま、元警察官がいるっていうのは逃亡する上で有利かもな。いざという時のおとりは必要だしな。
なんか不穏なこと言わなかった？
うん、気のせいだろ。
なら決まりだな。問題は君だが。
俺は一人の方がいい。
I knew it. Since last night, Ash had candidly expressed his aversion to being in a group. Even now, he looked on the edge of flight.
暗い、暗すぎるよアッシュ君。絶対友達とかいないでしょ。はあ、この無言返し。アッシュ君はもっと誰かと一緒に行動した方がいいよ。
なぜ？
その方が楽しいから。アッシュ君、絶対もっとコミュニケーション能力を身につけた方がいいって。だからアッシュ君も一緒に逃げよう。これ決定ね。
コミュニケーション能力はともかく、指名手配されて軽々と逃げ切れると思わない方がいい。地上から上空から、警察はあらゆる方法で我々を追ってくるだろう。一人での潜伏は体力勝負だぞ。それに、私が追う側なら、この7名は揃っていない方が捕まえやすいと考えるだろうな。先ほどの報道も、ばらけさせるのが目的かもしれない。となると、バラバラに行動してしまえば、それこそ相手の思うツボだ。情報がはっきりするまでは、行動を共にした方がいいだろう。
さすが元本職。今度講習会でも頼みたいぐらいだよ。
Ash stared hard at Gib before turning away and breaking eye contact, but he didn't object. Taking Ash's silence as a yes, Gib clapped his hands.
では決まりだな。ひとまず北上し、ミラノへ向かうとしよう。ここではいずれ見つかる。警察の目を欺くには、人に紛れるのが一番だ。
July 17th, 2028, 7:52. Hideout Garage. Since our top priority was procuring immediate means of escape, we moved to the garage.
へえ、レトロなカブリオレの5シーターにバイクはサイドカー付きか。悪くないじゃないか。
きちんと整備されているし、ガソリンも入っている。
これで OK？
きちんと整備されているし、ガソリンも入っている。ひとまずはこいつを使わせてもらうとしよう。
What's my running total for compensation now? The others once again planned on stealing as a matter of course, but this time I couldn't object. We had to escape from the vicinity of the scene as quickly as possible. I was even the one who had suggested that we leave as a group. There was no other way. The realization dawned on me. This was how humans fell into a downward spiral of sin. At first, they think their situation At first, they think their situation forced their hand. Over time, their sense of guilt would be numbed until sinning became the norm. If that was the case, I must never forget. I had to remember every single crime I committed.
でもこの古いカブリオレ、本当に走るの？これってもうクラシックカーじゃない？
ドイツの生んだ名車ですからね。整備がしっかりされていれば十分現役ですよ。バイクの方は
状態もいい。気に入った。
Ash placed his hands on the handlebars. For once, he had a small smile on his face. Even his eyes were lit up like an excited young boy. Apparently, he was fond of motorbikes. Is the bike that impressive?
それってそんなにいいバイクなんですか？
I was a complete amateur when it came to bikes, but based on his expression, this one wasn't inferior in the least.
こいつは80年代に作られたアメリカ製。おそらくほとんど手が加えられていない当時品だろう。1340cc の初期型。現行品よりもこっちの方が俺は音が好きなんだ。シングルヘッドライトでいい面構えをしている。サイドカーの側輪がフロントタイヤと同型だから、取り回しも乗り心地もいいだろう。正直、盗むのに気が引けるほどだ。
Ash didn't even look in my direction. He muttered on as if talking to himself. I could feel his fervent passion for motorbikes. Awkwardness over giving a spontaneous speech seemed to hit him all at once, and his expression abruptly stiffened.
とにかく、逃走で使うにはうってつけのバイクということだ。大事に使わせてもらおう。
His whisper almost sounded like he was trying to make an excuse. He was planning on stealing, true, but he wasn't fully free of guilt. I felt a bit less alone.
あ、キーが見つかりましたよ。これで乗れますね。
では車に5名、サイドカー付きのバイクに2名で分かれるとしよう。問題は誰がどちらに乗るかだが。
少なくともこのサイドカーに身長、体型的に問題なく乗れるのはそこの3人だけだな。
Ash pointed to Sally, Rum, and me.
サイドカーって自分で運転できないんでしょ？そんなのつまんない。お花とか撒いて遊んでていいならいいけど。
こんな狭いとこでじっとしてるのは飽きそうだよな。あ、でもうまくすりゃ他の通行者から積んでる荷物拝借できるかな。
サイドカーに乗車した人間が重心を変えるとバイクの事故につながることもある。2人はサイドカーに向いていないな。
ではサイドカーに乗るのは君で決まりだ。
はい。
Gib and Ash seemed to have decided that Rum and Sally were too risky. A sidecar, huh? Taking a look, it seemed like a precarious place to sit. Depending on the rider, the car could easily be crushed in an accident. I wanted to be in the car if I could, but it was decided before I had a chance to say anything.
で、誰が車とバイクを運転する？免許持ってないやつがいるなら除外するが。
もちろんサリーは持ってるよ。
僕もだよ。免許証は偽造の方が高いからね。
僕ももちろん免許はあります。
俺もだ。
俺も無免許で運転したことはないぜ。成人してからはな。
ならば誰でもいいというわけか。まずはバイクを運転する人間を決めたいところだが、君は誰がいい？
私が決めるんですか？
命を預ける相手だ。君が選んだ方がいいだろう。
Someone I'm trusting with my life.
一応スピード違反で捕まったことはない。
サリーもバイクの運転は自信あるよ。
僕もバイクは運転したことあるよ。ま、拝借したやつだけどね。
盗品を乗り回してたってわけか。
初めて扱うバイクでも乗りこなせるってことだよ。安心するだろ？
それでどうする？
Oh boy.
状況を記録するのか？
これでいいかな。
I mean, you know, it's pointing you towards picking Ash since he was the one that was, like, most interested in the bike. Gib looked at me, essentially asking who I was willing to entrust with my life. Among them, the driver I thought I'd feel safest with was... well, let's see. Honestly, it could be any of them. Really, it makes more sense to have Gib since he's the police officer. Sally would also be good, but I have a feeling that Sally isn't quite who she says she is, so I'm not sure if 100% trust him. But we'll go with Ash, that's fine.
アッシュさんにお願いします。
そうか。
That was all Ash had to say in response, but he mounted the bike ahead of me, as if he couldn't wait. Hold on a minute.
行くぞ。
いや、私たちが車に乗り込んでからだ。もう少し待ってくれ。
アッシュくんノリノリじゃん。こんなテンション高いとこ初めて見たよ。
He really loves a bike a lot, huh?
では、不測の事態に陥った場合は、ミラノのドゥオーモで合流するとしよう。何も起こらないことを祈るがな。
Duomo, he means Piazza del Duomo at the heart of Milan, right? Is it really okay for us to show up in a place like that? Completely unaware of my anxiety, everyone followed Geep's command and filed into the car. Was I really fine with this outcome? Though I had the urge to hesitate, with everyone in a hurry to leave, I ended up climbing into the sidecar. The seven of us split into the cabriolet group and the bike and sidecar pair. We headed north for Milan on the highway. Just in case, we drove side by side at a distance where we could communicate with each other if we shouted. However, perhaps because it was just after the news report about us, lots of police cars were patrolling the highway. Agitation shot throughout the group. Okay, but those bad sound effects are really loud.
Junbi wa nukari naku desu ne.
Okay, everybody else is at maximum? Okay, good.
これこのまま行っていいわけ？
え？引き返した方がいいんじゃないの？捕まっちゃうって。
いや、検問しているわけではない。止められないよう普通に走行すれば大丈夫なはずだ。
でも近くにいると顔が見られてしまいそうですし、急いでここから逃げた方がいいのでは。
バカ。こういう時は派手に動くとかえって怪しまれる。あくまでバカンスを楽しむ友人同士のふりをするんだよ。
って何速度上げてんの？
せめてバイクと車で他人のふりをした方がいいような。
あっちの声全然聞こえないんだけど。
It was hard to hear over the roar of the road, and since we were still basically strangers, we didn't cooperate well. The situation spiraled out of control.
警察がこっち見てます。急がないと。いや、逆走した方が。
逆走はするな。
速度を落としてください。でないとスピード違反で捕まって。
We swerved left and right between the lanes, driving conspicuously. Sure enough, we earned the police's attention.
そこの車両止まりなさい。うわ、やば。早く逃げるよ。
The police sirens were now focused on us. When I turned to look, one police car was pressing nearer, lining up to intercept us. If they caught up and saw our faces, they'd realize that we were the wanted fugitives. It seemed that for the first time, we all shared the same sentiment. No one had to say anything. In the same instant, both the car and the bike took off. And so, the car chase began.
少し休憩しましょうか。
これで OK？
Okay, well, why don't we stop it there?
これで問題ありませんか？
This is Meowmurai. You've been
後ほ
watching
ど合流しましょ
Despera
う。
Drops running on Nintendo Switch 2. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching. I will see you at the next stream.